Hey everyone, welcome to this, my first of two videos on the Konica Koni Omega Rapid, an interchangeable lens, interchangeable asterisk, sort of film back 6x7 format rangefinder camera. What does all that mean? Okay. Interchangeable lens means that the lens on the camera can be taken off and a different one can be put on at any time when you're not taking a photo without messing up your images. You actually can't take this off when you're taking a photo because the mechanics on this are very complicated. So there were four lenses available for the system, a 58 and a 60mm, functionally the same, this 90mm and also a 180, I think was the other one. We'll cover those in the second video. 6x7 format means that it takes 120 film, which is this stuff right here, and then it shoots images, which are 6 centimeters by 7 centimeters. Actually, they're like, it's roughly like, I think 56 millimeters by 67 millimeters, something like in that range, but nominally 6x7. It has no light meter, so you're going to have to do your own manual exposure calculation with this camera. The shutter speeds are built into the shutter in the lens, but I think all of the Omegas were bulb plus 1 second to 1/500th. That's pretty typical. That's what this lens has. I'm not sure if the 180 millimeter had the same shutter speed range or not. The aperture range on this lens is 3.5 to f3.5 to f32. That's again going to vary by lens. This is a rangefinder camera, meaning you look through a window in the back here. We'll talk about this more in the second video, but it has parallax correction. So there are framing guides in here that move as you focus, and you can literally look through the back of the window and watch the framing guides move as you focus. And then you use a rangefinder mechanism to align two overlapped images in the rangefinder to achieve focus. The flash sync on this camera is any speed that the shutter can deliver because it has a leaf shutter on it. In terms of medium format cameras, this is one of the more compact and also really high quality medium format cameras. Today, these actually sell for fairly little. Just before this video, I was looking at the prices on these online, and they are a perfectly good one, sells for what a half of a parts grade Pentax 6x7 would sell for. A part of that is because it's a rangefinder, it's a bit fiddly. The whole system's a bit fiddly. It's gonna need new light seals. Those are just a long time to change all those out. And there's also only 4 lenses, and they're a little bit hard to find, a couple of them. But if you are looking for an entry to get into medium format shooting and you like the idea of 6x7 and you don't want to carry around an RB67, RZ67, or Pentax 6x7, this is probably going to be really worth looking at based on cost and size. The target market for the Koni Omega Rapid would have been the professional, but it was a somewhat specialized camera. Rangefinders were not SLRs like all of the other 6x7s I can think of. I guess there's a couple Fujis in that range that are rangefinders. A rangefinder camera in medium format was for a very specialized niche user, so there wouldn't have been that many people going crazy to get one of these. When this camera was launched, only 3 lenses came with it. The 60mm, this 90mm, and the 180. I remembered correctly. The 180mm lens option was intended for portraits, and it could focus as close as 12 feet. So a fairly decently large portrait studio for that. The 90mm would have been the general use lens, and then the 60mm was for landscapes. This 90mm, by the way, is a Tessar designed lens, so it's a really good and reliable lens, and that should mean the image circle would cover something very close to 6x9, maybe 6x8. Should be a hair bigger, but that would mean you'd have really good projection onto the film for a 6x7 format with relatively low light loss for the focal length. This was made by Konica in Japan, and this one was made somewhere between 1964 and 1967, which is when this iteration of this camera was produced. It was preceded by the Simmons Omega 120 camera, and it was followed by the Koni Omega Rapid M. Now, if you have your Koni Omega Rapid, we're going to go through what everything on the camera is and talk about all of the different stuff on it. We're going to start up here on the top. These are cold shoes. There's 3 of them. I honestly have looked at this camera for hours and just been like, why? I guess in theory, you could put a light meter on one of them, and a flash on another. Light meter here, flash and flash. That would actually work pretty well. You don't need to put a rangefinder mechanism in. I guess you could mount 3 flashes if they were small enough, or 2 of them are pointing off to the side. You cannot trigger a flash with these shoes though. They're cold shoes. You would need to connect the flash to the PC port on the lens, which we'll talk about in the second video in depth. So anyway, that's what these are. Cold shoes, cannot fire a flash from them. Also here, we have the strap bars right here. And this is where you would connect your camera strap. Oh, I have in my notes, one of the things that you could put into one of these cold shoes, especially this middle one, would have been the 60mm lens viewfinder framing guide. So the 60mm lens, and later for the 58, would have or should have come with a framing guide that you could look through to get an idea of what was going to be on your photo, because the viewfinder does not indicate that, I don't think. On the front of the camera, we have just a whole bunch of stuff to look at. Here is this is one of the 2 rangefinder windows, okay? The way that a rangefinder works, and I have a whole video on this that you can check out if you want to learn more about the mechanism of a rangefinder, is that light goes through these 2 windows, one on each side. And then so if you have your point that you're focusing on up here, light reflects off of it to this window and to this window. So you have a triangle, okay? Your point, your 2 windows makes a triangle. As you focus the lens, there's a mirror assembly back here that brings those 2 images into focus. And when those 2 images overlap, that's the focus point that this lens delivers. So these are the rangefinder windows. The light, this is the focusing window, and this is the viewfinder window. This is the larger window that you see everything out of. This is your frame illumination window. So when you look through this, the framing guides in here will appear to glow golden. That's because light coming in through here illuminates some etching on the beam splitter or two-way mirror that's inside of here, so that it illuminates the framing guides that also adjust as you adjust focus. Really fascinating bit of engineering. Here's the lens, and the lens is its own complicated mechanism that we're going to talk about in depth in the second video, how to change them, how to read the markings, how to use it, but it's right here on the front. This is the shutter button right up here. This is the lens mount. This is the, this right here is the lens blind that you can engage. You have to engage to remove the lens. We'll see that in the second video. This is the lens lock release button that you can unlock the lens after the blind has been engaged. Lots of protections in here to make sure that the film wasn't ruined when you swapped out lenses. Going here to the camera's back, this is your viewfinder window. This is what you'll look through to sight up your images and obtain focus. This is a little viewfinder adjustment cover that a camera tech could undo that and make fine adjustments to the viewfinder if it had gotten out of alignment. If your viewfinder is fine, and if you don't know what you're doing, don't mess with that. Konica. This is your film type window. When you take your 120 film out of a box, you just slide it right the top of the box right in here to remember what kind of film you have. This is a button we'll talk about when we talk about loading film in the second video, but basically this helps to load and advance film as needed at different points. Film back lock, made in Japan, frame counter right here. Now this does have interchangeable film backs that you can use. However, once you load a film back, you are stuck with it until you've shot all 10 rolls. This is not an interchangeable back in the sense that you can do a mid-roll swap. You cannot mid-roll swap and have your film survive that with this camera. Also on the back here, this right here is your film advance pull lever. So interesting mechanism on how to advance the film is that you pull this lever and it advances the film. And I'll show you in the second video the whole mechanism that works, how that works inside of this film holder, because it is absolutely fascinating how they did this. For now, let's get back to load, because that's where we'll need to be for the second video. And as you might have heard a couple times, as you as you advance the film, it also simultaneously arms the shutter. On this side of the camera, we just have this grip and hand strap, but basically this is what you hold to hold your camera and take your photo. On this side of the camera, things start to get pretty interesting. Here we have the focusing knob, and in the second video, I'll tell you how to use this focusing knob, how to read what it's telling you, and how to understand how to use it with the different lenses. And then, of course, we saw the film pull here. I'm gonna pop the camera back off, and we'll take a look inside of the camera. And here we have a couple of film areas. And we'll talk about all the stuff on the camera back itself in the second video. But here we have a couple of film areas. This is, I get this silver area is the outside of the film, the shutter area. And basically what this would do is this would be sort of like your film guide rails. The pressure plate sandwiches the film up against here, and it would keep the film flat across the entire negative space. And that's really it that's in here. Everything else that's in here is sort of like levers for communicating between the camera and the film back. I do have some tips for using your Koni Omega. The first is that this was the first of the Omega cameras that could take 220 film. However, you needed a 220 film back. The 120 film backs could not shoot 220 film. There's no like switch like the Pentaxes have. This was also the last Omega that could not allow mid-roll changes. So like I said, once you load a roll of film and you've started it, you're locked into it until you take all 10 photos. The generation of cameras after this included a mechanism by which mid-roll changes could be done. So this was one of the things that makes this model camera a little bit cheaper on the used market, is that you're locked into a roll of film from the start. You don't have the ability to do a mid-roll change. This also provided only the framing and control options for the 60, 90mm, and 180mm lens. The 58 could also work on this in terms of framing and focusing. However, the 135mm lens was not designed with this camera in mind. It came after this camera. You can physically mount it. However, it's ridiculously challenging to know for sure what's going to be in focus and to properly get that to properly use that lens. So this camera is not recommended for the 135 RA mount Konica lens. Some things not to do with your camera: don't store it with the shutter ready to fire. Always trigger the shutter after you're done taking photos, because this is a leaf shutter mechanism, and when you arm it, all kinds of springs get armed. And so if you leave them just sitting under tension, then they can become fatigued and weakened, and they can either break or your shutter timing can be thrown off, and you don't want that. So always trigger your shutter when you're done. If you want to, you can manually arm your shutter here to make sure that you have triggered it. And if you want to do that with the lens cap on, you can do that as well. That way you don't waste a roll of a frame of film. You can also drop the, if you want to do this, you can trigger your shutter by physically removing the lens, manually arming it, pushing the lens triggering button, and I'll show you all of that in the second video at length, how this works, because it is so neat. And then putting your lens back on, relocking it in place, and that will trigger your shutter without the risk of accidentally taking a photo. Don't touch the shutter inside of the lens. Obviously, if you're touching the shutter, you have taken the lens apart, and that's just a terrible idea. Don't leave your camera or lenses in your car, because heat can absolutely cause the lubricating oils in the lens to get onto the aperture. And even though this aperture stops down as you adjust the aperture ring here, if you get, if you get the leaf shutter mechanism oily, then that can be an issue for your shutter timing. Also, cold weather can cause the lubricating oils to break down because they become thick and gummy, and then they don't work properly. Don't let your Koni Omega get wet. It's not weather sealed. It has metal components which will rust. Just remember that your Koni Omega is a precision tool that should be handled with care and respect. And as long as you take care of your camera will take care of you. So that's it for the first video. In the second video, we're going to go through all of the operational aspects of this camera. And if you want to hop right over there, here's a card that will take you straight to that second video, so you guys can see how this camera works in depth and in detail. See you guys over there.